The importation of 300 megawatts of electricity for a period of 6 months has continued to be in a state of abeyance, as both businesses and consumers have not been spared by the extended hours of load shedding. While it is said that necessity is the mother of invention, for most Zambians, it is actually adversity occasioned by load shedding that has made them to improvise. Zambian businesses countrywide are now forced to explore alternative sources of energy to keep their enterprises running. Lusaka-based internet cafe operator Charles Mulikita explains the cost of energy diversification at SME level.
The income is not definite. Sometimes make more, other times make less. But on a normal day, you expect to make at least 200 or more, 200 kwacha or more. Yeah, but in this case, you find that you are making maybe less than 100. Maybe if you have a good number of clients, maybe it's only 100 kwacha maximum. But then from the same 100 kwacha, you have to look at fuel, meaning you are making less money. Good at the same time is an expense, because when it works for some time, it consumes a lot of fuel. So it means you have to spend again on fuel, which is a hiccup on our part. Yes, because you find that you spend 80 kwacha or more for it to operate smoothly. It can operate like continuously, maybe for 5 hours. Then you have to top up the fuel. Otherwise, what we normally do is that if we don't have clients, we switch it off to save the fuel. But if we have clients like coming one after the other, it means it has to run continuously. More fuel is used in that way. Our business has been affected very much, because you find that when we are supposed to have a lot of clients, that is most of the time in the morning, there's no power. So we are losing out in that area, whereby you find that the clients who normally come are disappointed. They find that you are not working. Sometimes they come at a time whereby they have a lot of business to give you, and then there's no power. So we have been affected because we are losing out on income. We don't have money to run the business smoothly.
Last week, Zambia's power utility announced that it has extended load shedding by 3 hours due to a fault at Mamba power plant. This is how the business community feels about this.
That comes very bad news from the business community. We have always talked about the need for Zambia to plan very carefully in terms of looking at its energy needs for both domestic and manufacturing and mining consumption. Sadly, we have not caught up with the excessive demand that has been placed upon our grid system, and now we are paying the price for it. Definitely an increase in load shedding hours comes almost as a disaster to the business community. Business is not able to operate at its optimum. The confidence by the business community is lowered. It is always important that the main factors of production are actually in place, and energy is one of them. When energy is affected, then definitely it's a chain reaction. All other sectors will fall, all other issues will fall in place, and definitely that does not improve the confidence in the business community.
A recent twist to Zambia's electricity saga emanated from the Energy Regulation Board, where it has been announced that a consultant to conduct a cost of service study has been appointed. The Consumer Unity Trust Society, which has been advocating for fair pricing of tariffs, is elated by this development.
First of all, we are very happy, I think, to finally see that we have a consultant that's been found to do the cost of service study, especially given some of the issues we'd seen with the previous consultant. What we are concerned about, though, is that the discussion about the cost of service study really began in 2017 with the national budget that was read by Honorable Felix Mutati at the time. And he had indicated that there was a necessity for the cost of service study to happen in order to ensure that consumers weren't paying for inefficiencies that exist within ZESCO, within sort of the tariff structure. It's now 2 years down the line, and only now do we have the consultant, which means that we need to wait even more before we have that study that speaks to how much consumers should be paying, how much big private companies such as mines should be paying, and also what kind of reforms ZESCO needs to be taking, because I think what's quite key and what is now common knowledge is that there are very significant inefficiencies that exist within ZESCO. Looking at, for example, the staff, according to studies, we've got almost 70% more staff at ZESCO than we should have. And so I think our concern is that consumers should not be paying for some of those inefficiencies. We need to get the cost of service study done as soon as possible so that we can ensure that we are paying our fair share. I think there definitely needs to be much more communication towards the public in terms of whatever reforms are happening within ZESCO, because I think insofar as there's that asymmetry of information, the public still remains very, very cautious of what's going on in ZESCO. And I think you're absolutely right. The biggest concern that the public has had with regards to ZESCO has been the bloated staff. I think I mentioned earlier that according to different reports, we've got 70% more employees at ZESCO than we should be having. And not only that, but we are also aware that many ZESCO employees actually receive subsidized electricity. So the average consumer, such as both yourself and I, are paying for electricity that this bloated staff at ZESCO are using. And I think for us, that's a very big concern. And I think we would need to see most significant reform to convince the public that steps are being taken to reform the parastatal.
At the moment, we've been told that Zambia is currently in talks with South Africa's ESCOM to be able to facilitate that, supply of 300 megawatts of electricity to cushion the 700 deficit, that we're currently grappling with as a country. But we haven't seen much progress in this particular respect. Do you think this deal will pull through?
I think right now we all are waiting to see what will be the outcome of the deal. We did hear ZESCO indicate that they were in conversations, but because of the delay, we've heard a number of different stakeholders start to question whether that conversation is actually happening, partly because South Africa currently is also going through a certain level of load shedding on their part, right? So bringing into question this entire conversation. So it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about there needing to be much more clear communication from ZESCO, from the ERB to the public around what exactly is happening, particularly with regards to those discussions. We need to take a two-pronged approach to addressing this issue, both short-term and long-term. I think the long-term is where there's been quite a lot of discussions around, I mentioned earlier, reforming ZESCO, but also secondly, putting investment in sustainable sources of electricity. I think that's something we haven't seen, but are now starting to see a lot of rush towards because of our current crisis. But not only that, we need to find short-term solutions. The IMF was here a couple of months ago and indicated that solely due to poor rainfall, due to climate change, our GDP growth had dropped to less than 2%. And that's a concern for us because the only way you make meaningful inroads in poverty reduction is if you're growing at 7%. So from a short-term perspective, this conversation we mentioned earlier about importation needs to happen. It needs to be transparent so that all stakeholders are involved, so that essentially whatever tariff hike needs to be put in place is something that has buy-in from all stakeholders. So essentially, like I mentioned, this two-pronged approach, both long-term and short-term, to try and address our current situation.
Energy expert Akabondo Kabechani chips in and provides some tips on how ZESCO can restore its fortunes.
The thing that ZESCO needs to focus on is to diversify their power portfolio. At the moment, ZESCO I think has mainly hydropower. They've got a few diesel power stations, and then of course on the IPP side, independent power producers, we have a number of colonies which has about 300 megawatts. Beyond these, I think the significant ones that we have away from hydro should be Ndola Energy, which has a heavy fuel oils plant. But of course, in terms of pipeline projects, there are a number of pipeline projects that are there, including Chipata Port. So the main thing that ZESCO can focus on right now is to diversify their power sector portfolio away from hydro as well as maximize the hydropower potential by rolling out all hydro power projects. Hydro has a lot of advantages. It's one of the cheapest and it's clean. So in terms of investment, we need to still maximize hydro despite the risks of climate change. So you will notice also that until recently, ZESCO was not allowed to go into solar and other forms of energy. But as of, I don't know whether it's September or July, I need to get my facts right, ZESCO has been allowed to develop other power sources, including solar and wind. So they've scheduled around 600 megawatts of solar, which they need to procure. But again, solar of course has its disadvantages as well. When you don't have full sunlight, then you tend to have challenges. But it's better to have it in the mix. So we're talking 700 megawatts of solar, which ZESCO is supposed to procure. We've got a few gauge lower, which is around 750 megawatts, which is coming online next year. So in terms of the power deficit that we have, which is sitting around 700 megawatts, we should be able to resolve the problem by next year. But we should be cognizant of the fact that demand is also growing. So while we are resolving the issues, there's need to have a sense of urgency in terms of investments. Government currently is constrained in terms of fiscal space in trying to get investments in the power sector. So there's need for us to also look to the private sector in terms of investments. But we need to unlock the bottlenecks that have made it difficult for the private sector to invest in our power sector. So we are looking at issues to do with procurement. We're looking at issues to do with the whole planning process. We're looking at issues to do with the Energy Regulation Board and its independence, which need to be smoothened out to attract investment. We're looking at the credit worthiness of ZESCO, which if ZESCO is in a poor financial state, investors will perceive a risk. ZESCO being an off-taker buys power from independent power producers, and so there's need for ZESCO to be in good financial shape.
To mitigate the current extended hours of load shedding, ZESCO turned to South Africa's power utility, Eskom, which is yet to respond in the affirmative. As our hope remains in Eskom, it is worth noting that Eskom is also experiencing myriad of challenges that include a mammoth debt of $30.5 billion and Russian supply of electricity, which subjected South Africans to up to 4 hours of load shedding last week. Before Eskom releases power, $41 million upfront payment must be made. Does Zambia have this money currently? It is certain that 533 million kwacha, which ZESCO is expected to pay Eskom, can make a difference when it comes to servicing Zambia's scheduled interest payments on its debt.